Pretty comprehensive from Henry Beebe, and that's where we kick off with the Bloodstock Report. Ian Bartlett, your thoughts on that?
Well, Henry operates at the top end of the market, and I suspect...
Well, I think he operates at all ends of the market, but yes.
OK, yes. But the problem is not at the top end of the market. It's obviously further on down in the market. As for being surprised it leaked, I'm not. I mean, everything leaks these days. I'm not at all surprised it came up. If you're going as the BHA to get the bloodstock industry or the auctions industry to sort itself out, and you've got a lot of them involved, and they might pay lip service to being, yeah, we'll help out, we'll move forward. Not all of them are going to be the same as Henry, I'm afraid, and I suspect that's where their leak come from. So I'm not surprised the leaks come out, and you know, lower on down. I've never gone to buy an unraced horse at an auction. I'd imagine it's a fearsome thing to do, yeah, there's a lot of stories.
But you have bought horses in public auction? Either through a third party or personally?
Yes.
And have you ever felt compromised, or do you feel that it's because of your knowledge of the game that you wouldn't feel compromised?
I didn't feel compromised because I've instructed my trainer that's going to train it is dealing with it, and they know better about what's going on now than I would do. I wouldn't go and do it myself. I would get somebody... that's the problem here is if you're coming into the game as a new owner, who do you get to buy a horse for you? That is your biggest problem.
And you need to have complete trust in that person, Walter.
Without doubt. I buy horses from my friends in Scandinavia on a very small level. Obviously, I have bought both yearlings and horses that have been in training. And I have always felt comfortable in what I'm doing. As Barty says, quite rightly, I think the problem rears its head when it's somebody new to the business. They've got a lot of money to spend, or they've got some money to spend, and they think, who am I going to get? Who's going to buy this horse for me? And they know nothing about the game. Those people can be vulnerable in any walks of life, whether it be buying racehorses or getting involved in the stock market or whatever. There is always that little doubt.
And that's why you need a code of practice to ensure that those people are not taken advantage of, and we don't lose that money from the sport. And I think that is where this could take the.
I think that's the way it should go.
We're going to move on because time is against us. We're going to move on to the headline on this morning's Racing Post, which is that the Levy Board has bookmakers in its sights over payment for cash-back offers. William Derby, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think it references Cheltenham Festival 2019, which I was there, and it was a bonanza for punters. There were so many wonderful offers if you were a punter in terms of enticing you into the sport and to get involved in the race.
Wonderfully enticing offers, but not necessarily wonderful offers. Yeah.
Yes, but marketing the sport to the sports fan, the sports bettor, which is a good thing in and of itself. So that's the main thing. I think what the Levy Board are doing are checking that it's fair, the accounting for those bets and those offers, and that it's within the code of practice that they have with the bookmakers and legal. So they have asked the bookmakers, as I understand it from the report in the paper, to clarify how those bets are free bets are being treated and cashback offers, etc., which is a healthy state to be in dialogue between the Levy Board and the bookmakers. But the underlying fact is there was a surprise £17 million shortfall in the levy yield, which came as a surprise to all racecourses, all constituents, and that has a huge impact on prize money and the ability to fund the sport. So it is incumbent on the Levy Board and the bookmakers to work together to ensure there's a fair system of dealing with free bets and cashback offers.
I mean, and let's be clear here, Barty, because the ramification of this is that racing is essentially underwriting the bookmakers' marketing spend, and we can't really allow that to happen.
No, I mean, the question is it an accounting trick by the bookmakers on how they're reporting? It is basically the underlying thing with this.
And the answer I would suggest is
Probably yes.
yes. Right, we shall move on to another Cheltenham-related story. These are the changes to the National Hunt Chase. A suite of recommendations this week from the BHA, including reducing the field size of the National Hunt Chase, reducing the distance of the National Hunt Chase, and tightening up the qualifications for the riders involved. I can't see anything in this that I disagree with, Walter, but I don't want to lead the witness. I'll let you tell me from your point of view whether you think they've done the right thing.
I wouldn't be the best person to ask about National Hunt racing. Obviously, I watch the festival. I'm not quite sure about that one. I think I'll leave it to some of my other more updated co-guests here to answer that one, Nick.
I think what the racecourse has done here is say to the participants in this, so the amateur riders, but the trainers as well, look, something has got to be done because of what happened this year. We're doing something, but we've kept the spirit of the race. It's now up to you, i.e. the riders, trainers, owners in the race next year, to make sure it doesn't look as bad as it did in 2019. Because it's only 2 furlongs shorter. The riders have to be more experienced. The horses have to be better. So the BHA and Cheltenham are doing everything they can to keep the race as similar as it is at the moment. It's now incumbent on those that take part in the race to keep it as, how do you put this, good-looking as it can be.
Optics is the word of the moment, isn't it? The word that no one really used until about a year ago. Now everyone uses all the time. But it is about the optics now, William.
Yeah, and Cheltenham have got a very successful track record in evolving and tweaking and improving the festival from what it was when we were younger to what it is today as a beacon of the jump season and such a showpiece for the whole sport. So there's some very good people involved in this, and they will take a considered view of how to move the festival forward, both with this race and other races and the race programme.
Considered and evidence-based. Now there's a new Mares Chase going into the Cheltenham Festival, which no one seems to, well, very few people seem to be supportive of this week. What it means, Barty, is that one race has to go west.
It does.
So which race should it be?
The favourite to go is the Novices Handicap Chase.
The 0 to 145,
Yes.
Is it?
Yes, that's favourite to go because it's the lowest turnover race. It's the lowest turnover race because it's the last race on the Tuesday. The way people, or somebody priced it up, they've looked at it completely the wrong way, in that the turnover on each race depends not only on the race itself, but where it is on the card. It's not the Novices Handicap Close Brothers race. It isn't on telly. Sorry, it's not on ITV, it's obviously on RTV. And so that's the reason for that. The one they could possibly move has been touted as the Fred Winter, the 4-year-old handicap hurdle, because that has had an effect on the Triumph hurdle. So,
and has produced no winner of any great consequence either, that's the other.
Well, it's the race itself that you should be interested in. You could move that to Kempton on the Saturday, certainly, and put the Mares race in. If you look at the turnover, betting turnover, the one that doesn't punch its weight is the 2.5 mile Conditions Novices Chase. And as this is going to be a 2.5 mile Conditions Mares Chase, you could swap those in. Where you swap that out to, don't know. Move it to Cheltenham in April. That's probably the best place for it.
Do you like the idea of the Mares Chase, William?
I think a lot of these new races, at first, as you mentioned, there's a bit of a scepticism and a bit of a can't quite see that, and does it detract from the Gold Cup, a mare running in an equivalent race? But I think these races often find their feet, and a heroine comes along, and they become part of the tradition of the festival. So in 20 years' time, it's a non-issue. What I think Cheltenham have been clever in doing and announcing the new race, and all the jumps fans can have lots of debates and pub chats about which race to go and engage in the process, almost like a public vote, an X factor on how it runs. My bet is that they'll squeeze an extra race in. They'll keep one race and add the new one.
Interesting.
I have
and
no
that's from,
inside
and this is from a man who knows about these kind of tricks as well.
No,
so
no,
you're
no,
getting it
I
from
have no
It
inside
takes one
knowledge.
to know one.
It takes-
A £1 million Sky Bet E-Ball, by the way, it takes place next Saturday.
Thank you.
Right, here, front page of the paper today, era of the Super Filly. Excellent piece by Lee Mottershead, a regular guest on this programme, talking about how and why fillies and mares have started to dominate global horse racing. We'll see it again this week.
Yeah, and I think it's fantastic. Before we get on, I'm sure you're going to lead us into mares allowance, etc. But can we just celebrate the wonderful fillies we've seen over the last few years? Obviously Enable, obviously Winks and Trev before. Isn't it brilliant that those female superstars, those heroines of the sport, have stayed in training, haven't been rushed off to stud? Credit to especially Enable with Juddmonte to keep her in training this year. And as Barty said earlier, go for hopefully the third Arc de Triomphe. It's wonderful that people can really latch on to those fillies and mares as they did in Australia with Winks. And celebrate the females and create what wonderful scenes in a great horse race that we saw in the King George.
And we've talked about the mares allowance, fillies allowance on the programme quite a few times before, but should they have it at the top level?
Why not? I don't see it. Yeah, I didn't realise I mean, is it a golden era? I mean, like Pebbles, Pornice, Dahlia, Allée France, all of those. I mean, fillies have always done well, haven't they? I mean, for years the art was dominated by fillies.
The 3-year-old fillies particularly, because they got the huge weight allowance, the huge age allowance and the huge sex allowance. I mean, in which case people say, well, is this being unfairly swayed to one section of the horse population? These Group 1 races.
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is the same thing as the mares, the jumping mares, isn't it? Not all of them are as good, not all of them are as consistent. If you don't give them an allowance in general, you won't get them racing. If you don't get them racing, you don't have as many horses running. So, yeah, I mean, OK, at the top level, but you can't.
So it's
you just can't say it's a very good one, so it doesn't get an allowance.
It's an equine form of positive discrimination, essentially, isn't it? And
but it's existed for many decades, centuries, and I think we've seen competitive racing as a result.
This week at an AGM, a stable staff or racing staff AGM, a NARS AGM, Nick Rust spoke and he answered questions and his answers were reported. And he has written a letter to the Racing Post today saying absolutely fine that they were reported, but you need to understand the context in which those comments were given, and they were sort of in an off-the-cuff Q&A fashion. They're not necessarily indicative of BHA policy. Important to note that as regards the next 2 points, particularly when he talked about the whip, when he said the whip might well go at some point, he's not sure. 98% of the public had never seen a horse in the flesh. Data that he's subsequently admitted is not absolute and was kind of anecdotal. So it's a contextual thing. But Walter, you're someone who's ridden in a country where there was no whip. How did it work?
Well, there was, when I rode in Scandinavia, in Norway in particular, where there is no whip now. The whip was taken away completely. A small whip is allowed in 2-year-old races just for correction, but no whip in races for older horses. In my day, the whip was allowed, but gradually it sort of came to, you were allowed to carry a whip but not use it, and then it became that we rode with a small whip in all races and you couldn't pull it through. You just had it as a corrective measure. Now, I have seen it firsthand. First of all, Sweden and Denmark, they have the same whip rules as here, but you're only allowed 3 strikes. And they're very, very strict on that. But they're allowed to carry a whip and they're allowed to use it. Now, I have seen it firsthand, the implication of letting riders go out in a race with no whip. It's just like a workman who hasn't got any tools. We are all taught to ride properly from a young age or whatever age. A whip is part of the equipment. And it's strange to see how the racing has changed in a country where no whip is allowed. It might be something to do with the riders that are there. They're nearly all South American riders, but they have no tactical awareness whatsoever. They have all kinds of equipment on these horses, like the trotters have. They have something called flexible blinkers. They pull them up and they pull them down, and horses need... I was listening to Dermot...
In a line, because we've got to kick on, and we can come back to it at the end of the programme if you want, but in a line, what's the net effect on Norwegian horse racing?
The net effect is that it doesn't, you know, it doesn't look pretty at all, because once you drop a horse out, if you haven't got a whip, even just to have it, to show it to him, you don't have to hit him, you can get them going again. So all races now are run at breakneck speed because everybody wants to be there. They don't want to drop a horse out. So it's not pretty to watch at all.
Right, and on that we move on to the stable staff AGM, which is continuing the point about the Q&A that Nick Ross took, where he said that the BHA were ready to clamp down on trainers who were not looking after their workforce properly, which, you know, what's wrong with that? Other than the fact that, we talk about perception a lot, Ian, perception has come back that, you know, if you just landed from Mars, you'd think we were still operating in the era of the Victorian workhouse. And I think a lot of stable staff and people who employ stable staff are rather upset at the rhetoric, because they feel that they've put a hell of a lot of effort into making working conditions a lot better.
Yes, it's... Yes, this is the Dick Rust
Q&A in ours AGM.
About that, yes. Yes, I think he might have been like shooting off script a little bit with some of that. And, yeah, there was a quote in it about trainers are licensed and we'll chase them down with a stick if they're not looking after their workforce. Well, employment rights is something that's governed by law, and that's where it goes first. It's not for the BHA. This isn't, you know, yes, they want to look after everybody in the industry, but the relationship you have with the employer is governed by law, not by the BHA.
William?
I think it's really important that A, Nick's comments were put in context,
which he's done very well
in a specific question, and B, the wonderful work that goes on in the vast majority of stable yards around the country of very good practices, very good employment conditions, very well paid staff compared to the rest of the equine industry. I know Richard Fahey put out a tweet last night saying how well that team is rewarded and remunerated and looked after. And whenever I've been in yards around us in Yorkshire and elsewhere, the staff there are hugely professional, hugely engaged in their jobs, and I think it will be a shame if the impression is given that the working conditions in a racing yard are terrible, because anything but from my experience.
William, thank you very much indeed, and those were this week's Talking Points.